In this Blender tutorial, I'll show you how to create these stylized trees with snow created with geometry nodes. So we're going to be adding a curve object, and then we will add the geometry node setup to the curve. In this way, you can use the draw feature in the curve's edit mode to draw where you want the trees to be, or you can select a curve handle and you can extrude it up, and then it will extrude up the tree. And as well as that, the geometry node stylized trees with snow will have some different custom values to control. So we have the trunk thickness, so I can make that trunk bigger or smaller. And then we also have the branches amount. So if you want very little branches, you can turn that way down. And so now the trees are very sparse, or you could turn that up to make the trees very thick. And then there's also the branches rotation, so you can just randomize the rotation of the branches. And then we also have the branches seed, so if you don't like where the branches are, you can change that seed value. And then we also have the branches size, just to change the size of all the branches. So I'll show you how to create this geometry node setup in the tutorial, but this is also a product which I've just released. So if you'd like to help support the channel and purchase the product and get these files, then you can find the product links in the description. And then at the end of the video, I'll give you a quick overview on how I use the geometry node tree to create this little snow scene right here. Now for the tree bark material, I am going to be using my procedural white birch tree bark material. So that is a procedural material tutorial which I created a little while back. So if you'd like to go ahead and watch that tutorial first and learn how to create the tree bark, we'll be adding it into the 3D scene. Or you can also help support the channel by purchasing the procedural tree bark. Links to that are in the description. Or if you've already purchased my ultimate procedural material pack, then you'll have that tree bark material in the material pack. Now just one more thing before we start the tutorial, I wanted to let you know about a really great add-on for creating custom landscapes. With the Terrainscapes add-on, you can create your own custom landscapes. Start by adding a terrain, and then you can load different mountain presets. You can also combine different layers of mountains on your terrain. The detail levels of the mesh is also customizable. The add-on also comes with material presets to add materials to your landscape, like rock and snow to the mountains and grass to the ground. The add-on also comes with many different biomes to add to your landscapes, like a mixed forest, jungle, rocky forest, bushes, and other biomes. You can also add different object layers, like rocks, grass, plants, and trees. You can find my full add-on review video with the link in the description, and if you purchase the add-on through my affiliate link, you'll be helping to support this channel. Alright, so here we are in a new scene in Blender, and I will have my screencast keys right down here in the corner so that you can see what buttons I'm pressing during the video. So I'm going to start by just selecting everything, and let's just delete everything. So I'm now going to be modeling the object, which is going to be the branch. So I'll go to the add menu, and we're going to go here to mesh, and let's add a cube. And then let's hit the tab key to go into edit mode, and I want to scale this cube down, and I'll scale it down on the z-axis and make it pretty thin, so something like that. And then when modeling to the real life scale in Blender, the default objects are quite large, so I'm going to scale this object down by 0.2 in edit mode. I'll just hit enter, so that is much smaller. So I'll now go back to object mode, and then in object mode I'll press Ctrl 2. Ctrl 2 is going to add a subdivision surface modifier with 2 levels, and then I can also use the object context menu to shade the object smooth. So I'm going to go back into edit mode now, and I'll go here to the face select, and I'm going to select this face here, and I'll scale the front face down a little bit, and then this back face here, I'm going to scale this face up a little bit. So now I'll take this front face here and I'll extrude it out, and I will also scale it down. And if I go to side view by hitting the 3 on the numpad, I'm going to rotate this, kind of bring that down, bring it down like that, and bring it back a little bit. And then I can extrude this down one more time, scale it down, and kind of bring that down, because we're creating a stylized tree. So it's just going to be kind of like a blobby shape of that branch. Alright, that's pretty good. So I'm now going to select this side face right here, and let's go to top view by hitting the 7 on the numpad, and I'm going to extrude this out, and we'll scale it way down, and I'm going to bring it much far forward and kind of rotate that over. And then I'll extrude it out again. Let's scale it down, and I'm going to go over here to the kind of the front, and I'll rotate it and kind of bring it down. Alright, just like that. And then also what I'm going to do is go back here to the vertex select. I'm going to shift and select all these vertices, and I'm going to bring them down even a little bit more, just kind of rotate that down. And also if I shift select these 2 vertices, I might bring them forward a little bit. So something like that. Let's do the same thing over here on this side, and you could, if you wanted to, like delete half of it and add a mirror modifier, but I thought I'd manually model both sides so that the shape will be randomly a little bit different. So I'll go to the face select, just select this face. I'll go to top view, and I can like extrude this out, scale it down, and kind of move it forward and rotate it. Alright, bring that back a little bit, and then also I want to rotate it down and kind of move it down a bit. Alright, And then I can also select this face and we'll bring both of them forward. Then I'll just select this face again and I'll just extrude that down, kind of scale it and rotate it down. So something like that. So it's kind of similar to the other one. And then also I might select the whole thing and I might scale the whole thing down just a little bit on the x-axis so it's a little bit more thin. And maybe this entire front piece here, I think I might scale that up and bring it out a little bit. All right, so I now want to create another shape on top, which is going to be the layer of snow. So I'll go back into edit mode and I'll go to the face select and I'm just going to hold down the shift key and just select these 4 top faces. And I'll duplicate them with shift D and bring them up on the z-axis, and then I can scale them all down a little bit and maybe bring them back a bit. And I'll now extrude them down and we're going to add some thickness and just bring that way down there so that the snow part will go into the branch part. And then these faces here, once I've brought them down, I actually just want to delete them. So I'll hit X and we're just going to delete the faces. All right, so we need to recalculate the normals now. So I'll select everything and I'll recalculate the normals by hitting Shift N. All right, so now what I can do is just hover my mouse over this top part here and press the L key to select the linked vertices. And now we just have that top part selected, and that is the part where the snow is going to be. So I can scale this and kind of just move it down, and we just want to place it there on top of the branch. So there's going to be like a layer of snow, and I also might scale it down on the z-axis a little bit so it's a little bit more thin. And then I'll also select this front face here, and I'll bring this front face out, just kind of pull that out and bring it down so the snow goes down a little bit farther. All right, and then finally, I'm going to go into edit mode and I'll select everything, and you can see there's the origin point, and wherever the origin point is, that is where it's going to be instanced from the curve when we add it to the geometry nodes. So I'm going to bring the entire mesh over in edit mode. I'll bring it over on the y-axis, and I'll just bring it right about there so that the origin point is at the very end of that branch. I'll go back to object mode now, and then let's save our project. So let's click on File, and we'll just click on Save and save our project. I'll just rename it to Tree Tutorial, click on Save As, and then just make sure to press Ctrl S as you're working on the project to save it. So I now want to create the materials for this object, so a material for the snow and the branch, but before I do that, I want to add some nice lighting so I can actually see what the materials are going to look like. So let's go over here to the world properties, and I'm going to be downloading a free HDRI from polyhaven.com, so the link will be in the description to that HDRI if you'd like to download it. So I'm going to click here on the yellow dot next to color, and then I'll choose environment texture, and then I can click on the open button to open up the HDRI. And I'm going to be adding in this Birchwood 1K HDRI from polyhaven.com. Again, link will be in the description, and I downloaded the 1K version and the HDR version from Polyhaven. So I'll click on that and then click on open image. So if I hold down the Z button and move my mouse up into the rendered view, we can see the HDRI in the background. Now, I'm going to be using the Cycles rendering engine because I want it to look a little bit more realistic. Even though this is a stylized tree, I thought the lighting would be nice if it was realistic. However, you could totally use the Eevee rendering engine if you want to. Eevee will work great for the scene, but I'll be using Cycles, so you can use either one. Now, I do want to do a few more things to the lighting. So while we're over here on the render properties, let's go down here to the color management, and I'm going to use the View Transform of Filmic. And then the look here I'll change to very high contrast to make the colors more contrasty and saturated. And then also let's go back here to the world properties, and I want to make the world a bit less strong because it's a bit bright. So I'll turn the world strength here to just like a 0.4 so it is less strong. And then I also want to add a sunlight shining on the objects. So let's go to the add menu, and I can just search for the sunlight. So let's add the light sun. I can bring the sunlight up here and just kind of rotate it and kind of move it out of the way. And then if I go here to the light settings, I'm going to turn the strength up to like a 6 so it is pretty bright. And I'll take the color here and I'll just make this like a very slight yellow color so it looks like some nice sunlight. So now we can actually do the materials. So I'll select the object, and let's click over here to go to the shading workspace. So I'll now hold down the Z button, move my mouse up into the rendered mode so we can see what that's looking like. And then over here, here's the shader editor. So I'll click on new to add a new material, and I'm going to call this snow because we're going to be adding the snow material first. So we're basically going to be creating a stylized snow shader. So I'll go to the add menu, and we're going to search for a Voronoi texture. Let's drop the Voronoi here, and then I'm going to be using the Node Wrangler add-on. If you don't have the Node Wrangler enabled, you can click on Edit, you can go to the Preferences, And then if you go over here to add-ons, you can go here to the search and you can start to type in Node and you can enable the Node Wrangler add-on, and I'll show you how to use the add-on in the video. So let's close the user preferences. So to use the Node Wrangler, you can hold down the Control and Shift key and then select different nodes, and that is going to preview the node on the object. So I can preview the Voronoi texture. Also with the Voronoi texture selected, let's press Ctrl T. That is another feature of the Node Wrangler, and it's going to add the texture, coordinate, and mapping nodes. So I'm going to use the object coordinates, so let's plug the object into the vector of the mapping, and the object coordinates is going to place the Voronoi texture on the object more evenly. So let's now change some of the Voronoi texture settings, and we're going to use this Voronoi to make it look like it's kind of a snowy, icy texture. So let's take this drop-down value right here, and we're going to change this to the Chebyshev instead. And you can see that Chebyshev is going to be kind of sharp. So we're going to use this to make it look like some icy snow. And then on the scale here, I'm going to change this to like 200 so there's lots of detail. So we can now take the distance of the Voronoi and let's put that into the normal of the principled shader to give it some bump. And then I can Control Shift and select the principled shader. Now there's some weird shading issues, and that is because we need to go to the add menu and we need to search for a bump node. So let's add the bump node and drop it down here. And we want to plug the Voronoi texture distance into the height value of the bump, and that way it's going to convert the Voronoi texture into actual bump data. So now the snow looks really bumpy, but it is way too strong. So let's turn the strength way down to just like a 0.3. Now I do also want to turn down the roughness because I want to be shiny because it is icy snow. So let's turn the roughness down to like a 0.15. Now I also want to make it look a bit more like snow by adding a little bit of subsurface scattering to make it look a bit soft. So let's open up the subsurface tab right here, and on the weight, I'm just going to turn this to like a 0.2. So this will allow just a little bit of light to go through. You can see if I turn it way up, that's what it's doing. So I'll just turn it to 0.2 so it's pretty subtle. And then one more thing you could do if you want the snow to be a bit more detailed is you could turn up this detail value here. So I might just turn this up a little bit to like a 5 so it adds a little bit more detail. So we will be coming back to this procedural material later. We're going to be adding something to the base color, but I want to do it later so you can actually see the effect of it. So that's going to be our snow shader for now, but we'll come back to this later. So now let's do the material for the branches. So I want to go over here to the material properties, and within the object's material slots, we want to add a new material. So we'll click on the plus here, and then we can click on new. And this material, if I double click on it, I'll rename it to branch. So for this material, I want to have it be a green color, but I want each branch to be a slightly different green color to add a bit of variation. Now, before we do anything, we need to actually add the branch material to the object because right now it is all the snow material. So let's go into edit mode. And then I just want to hover my mouse over the bottom part and press the L key to select just that bottom part. And then click on the branch, and you can click on assign. So it now has that branch material. So I'll go back to object mode, and then just for now, we can make the base color like a green color so you can see what that looks like. So to give each object a randomly different color, we're going to go to the add menu, and we're going to search for the object info node. Let's drop this down here. Now the object info has a random value, and the random value is going to randomly generate colors from black to white. So let's put the random into the base color. So now you don't have to follow along with this, but if I just duplicate this object many times, you can see each object will randomly be a different color. So I'll press Ctrl Z just to undo that. Now, instead of being black and white, I want to make the different green colors. So to do that, I'm going to search for a color ramp node. We'll drop the color ramp here between the object info and the principled shader. So I can now make all the different colors for the branches. So for this black one right here, I'm going to make this a kind of a dark color and then make it a green color. And then this one here, this is also going to be a green color, but it's going to be a little bit brighter. So something like that. And then I'm going to hold down the control key and click right here in the center to add another one. And this one I'm going to make a little bit less saturated and a little bit darker. And this one here, the very last one here, let's make this even darker. So now we have 3 different green colors. So again, if I duplicate this object, you can see every time I duplicate it, it's going to be a different random green color. So that's exactly what we want. Now I also want to turn the roughness up a little bit because I don't want the branches to be that shiny. So I'll turn the roughness up to like a 0.6 so it's a bit more rough. So that is going to be it for our branch object. So we can now go back here to the layout. And let's go back to the solid view, and I'm going to bring this branch over, just kind of get it out of the way. I can also bring the sunlight over out of the way. And then here in the center, we'll go to the add menu, and we're going to add our curve object. So let's add a curve Bezier. So I'll now go into edit mode with the tab key, and I'll rotate the curve up and kind of move it up here, just move it up like that, and then just kind of straighten it out a bit. So I'll kind of rotate this over and move it into the center of the 3D viewport. All right, so we can now add the geometry node setup to this curve. So let's click right over here on the geometry nodes workspace. If you don't have the geometry nodes workspace, you can click on the plus here, go to general and add geometry nodes. So in my geometry node workspace, I've set it up so I have the 3D viewport here and then the geometry nodes right here. So let's click on new to add new geometry nodes to the curve, and we can rename this. So I'll rename this to stylized tree with snow. So right over here, you can see it says stylized tree with snow. So I'll make this smaller so we have a bit more space. So the first thing that I want to do is add in the branch data. So I'll go to the add menu. We're going to search for the object info node, and let's drop it down here. And then you can zoom out here and you can click on the eyedropper and you can just select that branch there. So now the branch has been added in. So we want to distribute the branch onto that curve. So what we're going to do is go to the add menu. We're going to search for the instance on points. So instance on points, so that it will instance it on the curve. So we'll stick that here between the group input and the group output. So the geometry here, that is going to give us the points. So the amount of detail in the curve is going to be the points for where the branches are going to be placed. And then the actual instance object is going to be the object info. So we'll take the geometry and put that into the instance. So now you can see if I go into edit mode, you can see there's going to be one of those branches on each one of the handles in the curve. However, I want to add lots more branches and I want to add them all along the curve. So we need to add more points to the curve. We're going to go here to the add menu and we'll search for the resample curve, and we'll put this in between the group input and the instance on points. So now if I turn up the count here, you can see it's going to make the curve more and more detailed. It's almost like it's subdividing the curve. So it's adding more counts here and adding more detail, and it will also make the curve much smoother. So now you can see that there's going to be a branch for every count. So for my count value, I'm going to turn this to 170. I think 170 will be pretty good. Now there's way too many right now, but we'll fix that later. Now you can see the branches are all going in the same rotation. So I want to change the rotation and make each branch have a randomly different rotation. So to do this, we'll go to the add menu. We're going to search for a random value node. So we'll drop the random value node right here, and we can plug the value into the rotation. So now there is a minimum and a maximum value, but the problem with this is that it's rotating it around on all the axis instead of just the z-axis. So let's click on the float here, and we're going to change the type to vector instead. And this way we're going to have a x, y, and z axis to control it. So let's now put the value into the rotation. And now the maximum, we want to turn all these to 0. And now we can just take the bottom one, and the bottom one is going to be the z one. So we'll just take the bottom one and we'll rotate this, and you can see as I turn it up more and more, it's going to randomly rotate them around. So I'll just make this like a really big number, like 1,000, so it's very random. So now it's randomly going along the curve. Now there is a problem with this. If I go into edit mode and just rotate the curve, you can see even if the curve is very rotated, the branches aren't rotating with the curve. So let me just press Ctrl Z to undo that. So we need to tell the rotation to follow the rotation of the curve. So to do that, we're going to go to the add menu and we're going to search for the curve tangent node. And this will give us the curve data that we need. And then we're also going to go to the add menu and we're going to search for the align Euler to vector. So let's drop that right here. So we're going to take the align Euler to vector rotation and we're going to replace that there for the rotation on the instance on points. And then we're going to take that curve tangent node that we added and we're going to put that into the vector. So you can see the rotation is really weird right now. That is because we need to change the axis, and because I want it to rotate around on the z-axis, we're going to change the rotation to z. Now there is still a problem, and that is that the rotation isn't random anymore. And so I want to also use the random value node, which we used earlier, to give each one of the branches a random rotation. So let's put the random value into the rotation. So I can move this up here and maybe bring the curve tangent down here. So now you can see that looks correct again because each one of the branches has a random different rotation. Now you can see that it's upside down, and that's because when I first started the video, when I rotated the curve at the beginning, I just rotated it the wrong direction. So to fix this, we can simply just rotate this over, rotate that on the z-axis. Now I do want to keep my nodes nicely organized so that it's very easy to understand. So let's box select these 3 nodes, and I'll join them together into a frame by pressing Ctrl J. So now I can move the frame around, and that's just a nice way to organize the nodes. Now also, if I select the frame and press F2, I can add a label, and I'm going to rename this to rotation. So these are the rotation nodes. And then let's drag the group input back and drag this over. So these 3 nodes right here, if I select them and press Ctrl J to join them together into a frame, I can select the frame and press F2 to add a label. And I'm going to rename these to branches on curve, because these are the nodes which actually put the branches on the curve. So again, I'm just doing this to keep the nodes nicely organized, but it is totally optional. You don't have to do this. Now I also want to control the scale, because as the tree goes up higher and higher, the branches need to get smaller. So to do that, we're going to add some value into the scale here to actually control the scale, because right now we just have a single scale value, but I want to make it get smaller as it goes up. So to do this, we need to add some sort of node, which is going to give us the curve data of how far the curve is going up, and then we can use that to change the scale. So we're going to go to the add menu, and we're going to search for the spline perimeter node. So let's add the spline perimeter. So let's put the factor of the spline perimeter into the scale. So you can see it is working now, but it's actually doing the opposite thing that we want. So it's being small, and then it's getting bigger and bigger. So to fix this, we can just change the values. So to do that, I'm going to go to the search here, and we're going to search for a color ramp. And let's put the color ramp between the spline perimeter and the scale. Now, why the color ramp node is useful is because black values equal 0 and then white values equal 1. So if I drag these values over, you can see if there is more white, more and more the values are going to be 1, so it's going to be larger. However, if I drag the black tab over, more and more the values are going to be black, and so that's going to equal 0. So I'm going to switch these 2 values, so the white one will be over here and the black one will be over here. And finally, this is actually starting to look like a tree. Now later on in the video, when we add the trunk, I want to be able to actually see some of the trunk. So I basically want all the branches to end kind of up here instead of down here. So to do this, I'll drag the white tab kind of over here, and then I'll hold down the Control key and click here to add another tab. And this one, if I click on the color, I'm going to make this really dark. And so this way, now you can see the curve ends down here, but the branches are going to end a little bit higher. And so you can just drag this around. I'm going to stick it to about here and drag these really close. So the branches will get down and get bigger and bigger, and then suddenly they'll get really small and disappear. And then I also don't want them to be quite that big. So if we click on the white tab here and click on the color, we can make this color a little bit darker, and so that'll make it a bit smaller. So I'll just make this kind of like a light gray, something like that. And also this here, I'm going to drag this down so it's a little bit smaller, maybe scale it down a bit because we don't need it quite that high up. Now I also don't want the branches to get extremely small. If I zoom way in, you can see they're getting pretty ridiculously small. So to fix that, let's click on the black tab here, and I can click on the color, and I can make this kind of just like a dark gray. So just make it something like that, so it's a dark gray. So now the branches do get small, but they're still a reasonable size. And then you can also have more control by holding down the Control key and clicking here to add another tab, and then you can drag this tab around, and this is going to kind of control the size of the middle part. So I might drag this over here, and then I might make this just a little bit bigger, so it's a little bit larger. So something like that is pretty good. Now later on in the video, when we create the custom node group, I'm going to want to change the scale, and I'm going to want that to be customizable. But right now we only have this color ramp, and so this is a little bit complex to work with because we have to manually change all the different colors. So to make this easier to use, I'll go to the add menu. We're going to search for a math node, and let's put the math node after the color ramp. Now to actually control the scale of all of the branches, let's click on the add here, and we're going to change it to multiply. Now the value here, to make it back to its default scale, we can just turn the value to 1. So now the multiply isn't affecting it at all. However, if I now drag the value, that's going to make the entire thing bigger or smaller because we're multiplying the values. And again, the white values are going to equal 1 and the black values are going to equal 0. So that is how we can actually use math within this setup. So that'll control the scale of the branches. So let's box select all these nodes, and we'll join them together into a frame with Control J, and I'll select the frame and press F2 to add a label, and I can just call this scale. So these are going to be the scale nodes. And don't forget to save your project by pressing Ctrl S. And I totally forgot to go into the material preview, so I'll hold down the Z button, go down to material preview, so you can actually see what the materials are looking like. Now, I did mention that I wanted to add a little bit more to the snow material, and so we're going to be doing that now that we've actually distributed the branches all over the tree. So let's just go right over here to the shading workspace, and I'll kind of zoom out here. And then to get back to the snow material, we just need to click here on the instanced object. All right, so I'll now zoom in here. And what I want to do is actually add some ambient occlusion to the snow so that when the snow is really deep back in there, it gets a bit darker. So let's click on the snow material, and then I'll go to the add menu here, and we're going to search for the ambient occlusion node. And we'll make this smaller. So let's take the ambient occlusion, and I'm going to put the color into the base color. And so now you can see that kind of the inner parts there, it gets a bit darker. If I Control Shift and select the ambient occlusion, you can see what it's doing. So all those little dark areas there, that is what it's doing. So let me just Control Shift and select the principled shader again. So there it is before, and then there it is after. And then if you want to control that darkness a little bit better, you can also add a color ramp. So let's add a color ramp to control the colors and put it there in between the ambient occlusion and the principled shader. And then I can just drag the black tab out a little bit. You can see if I drag out way too much, it's going to make the whole thing dark. But if I just drag it out a little bit, it'll be kind of subtle. So that just adds a bit more depth to the tree, and I think it makes it look a bit nicer. All right, so we now want to actually make the trunk, because right now there actually isn't any trunk there inside the center of the tree. So let's select the tree, and we'll go back here to the geometry nodes. So to make the curve thick, we are going to convert it to a mesh, and then we'll use another object to tell it what the thickness shape is going to be. So we'll go to the add menu here, and we're going to search for the curve to mesh node. We'll drop this here, and then we want to take the group input, which is the original curve geometry, and let's put that into the curve. And then to give the curve some thickness, we can add a circle into the profile curve to actually make the shape. So we'll go to the add menu, and we're going to search for a curve circle. Let's drop it down here, and we can put the curve into the profile curve. And then to preview it here in the geometry nodes, I can Shift Alt and select the curve to mesh to preview it. So if I zoom out, you can see there's just a giant circle here. So let's turn the radius way down to just like a 0.1, so it's much smaller. And actually that is a little bit too thick, so I'm going to turn the radius even farther down to like a 0.05. So that is a bit better. So now if I go into edit mode and move the curve handles, you can see it's kind of like a noodle which is following along the curve. Let's also click on the fill caps here, because I do want the caps there on the top and bottom to be filled. Now, just like we made the branches smaller as it goes up, I also want the tree trunk to be smaller as it goes up. So to do this, we're going to search for the spline perimeter node, just like we did before. Let's add the spline perimeter and drop it over here. And then we need to add the set curve radius node to change the radius of the curve. So I'll go to the add menu. We're going to search for the set curve radius. So here it is, set curve radius, and we'll stick this here before the curve to mesh. So now this radius value is just going to make the entire thing bigger or smaller. So it's sort of similar to this radius. However, this one is actually changing the shape of what the profile curve is, whereas this is just changing the overall curve size. So this spline perimeter, we can take the factor and we are going to put that into the radius. So this way, instead of it using one single value, one single number value, it's going to be bigger or smaller depending on how far it is up on the curve. So the factor can go into the radius, and now you can see it's really small here, and then it's bigger as it goes up. But I want to flip the values, so kind of just like we did down here with the scale, I'm going to also be adding another color ramp to flip those colors. So we'll add a color ramp, we'll stick it here in between the spline perimeter and the set curve radius, and then if I just switch these two values, it's going to be the opposite. So you can see now it starts out as white, which equals 1, and then it turns to the black, which equals 0. So now it gets smaller as it comes up. Now I don't want it to get all the way small, because right now it's getting really tiny, so I'm going to click on the black color here, and I'm just going to make it kind of like a dark gray, so it is a little bit thicker the entire way up. And then also I'll drag this over here just to make it a little bit smaller, so I'll drag that over. Now you can see that this isn't actually really doing anything if I drag it, and that is because the curve doesn't have enough geometry. So to do this, I'm going to search for the resample curve. So the resample curve will give it more points and more detail. So let's put the resample curve before the set curve radius. So just stick it right there. And let me just kind of like drag it up there. So that's a bit better. So now on the count here, I'm going to turn this up really high to like a 300, so it has much more detail. And now if I drag this around, you can see that's actually going to control the size of the curve. So I'll just drag this over kind of like that. So it's really thin, and then kind of right about there, it starts to get thicker. So that is looking quite nice. And then also one more thing we can do to make this a bit better is we can take the curve circle resolution and we can turn that down because we don't need it to be that high resolution. So I'm just going to turn it to like a 12. If I go down here to the bottom and then change the resolution, you can actually see what that's doing. So if it's to 3, if there's only 3 points, it's actually going to be the shape of a triangle, but I'm going to leave it at 12 so that it looks like a circle. All right, so I now want to add the wood material to this curve. So I'm going to be using my procedural white tree bark material. So if you'd like to watch that tutorial, then I'll have the link in the description and you can learn how to create that procedural material. Or if you'd like to help support the channel and purchase the material, then you can get that material on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page with the links in the description. And also, if you're one of my customers of my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack, then that material is already in the Ultimate Procedural Material Pack. So if you followed the tutorial or purchased the material, we can just now add it into this Blender file. So to do that, let's click here on File, and then we can click on Append. And I'm just going to locate to the folder where I have my procedural white birch tree bark material on my computer, and I'm going to go inside the blend file. Then I can go over here to material. So here it is, the material folder, click on that. And then here is the material data. So I'll click on this and then open it up. So just double click on that to add it in. So it hasn't really changed anything, but we now have the data inside the blend file. So we now just need to add it to the curve. So I'll go to the add menu and we're going to search for the set material node, and we'll put the set material after the curve to mesh because we just want to add it to the trunk, but we don't want to add it to the rest of the setup. So then if you click on the drop down, here's all the materials that we have in our blend file, and we can add the white birch tree bark. So now that material has been added. And then if you want to change the settings for it, if you open up the side panel and go here to the material, you can't actually see it here on the side panel, but if we just click on the drop down, we can just add the white birch tree bark material to this object. So now we can actually see it. So this tree bark material will come with some different customizable values. And I'm actually going to go into the rendered mode so I can use the displacements. So let's turn the scale up. So I'm going to turn the scale up to maybe like a 2 or a 3. And then also if I go down here, I want to open up the side panel so I can see that better. This displacement strength, I want to turn this way down to just like a 0.02 or maybe even a 0.01 so it is more subtle. Also, maybe the scale, let's turn that back to like a 2. That is a bit better. And then also, I don't want to be able to see as many of those dark patches. So there is this patches amount value that we created in the tutorial. So I'm just going to drag the patches amount up so that you can't see as many of those dark patches and it's more white. And there we go. So that is going to be a nice material for the trunk. So we can just close the side panel again. So now let's box select all these nodes. So these nodes are the trunk. I'll press Ctrl J to join it together into a frame. And with the frame selected, I'll press F2 to add a label, and I'm going to call it trunk. So now we have the branches and the trunk, but we need to mix them together. So to do this, we're going to search for a join geometry node. We'll stick the join geometry right here, and then we'll plug this set material from the trunk and also the instance on points. We'll plug them both up to the join geometry. So now if I zoom out here, you can actually see that the trunk has been added to the tree. So let's jump back over here to the layout so I can see this in the full screen view. And I'm going to hold down the Z button and go into the material preview. And so there is the finished tree. So if you want to edit the trees, you can select the tree and hit the tab key to go into edit mode, and you can move the different curve handles around, and you can also scale them and just change the curve handles. And you can also select the curves and duplicate them to make more trees, and you can move that around, and you can also extrude the curve handles by hitting the E key. Now, if you want to draw the trees, then in edit mode, you can use the draw feature. So I'll press the T key to open up the side panel, and we can click over here on the draw. And so this will allow us to draw curves in edit mode. So now I can just click here and I can drag up and let go, and you can see that it's going to add the different trees. So we can just draw different trees and add them to our scene. Let's also make a wobbly one. That's kind of weird. Let's also have one which is like going down. That's kind of cool. So now you can make these really customizable trees by using this geometry node setup. Now we can also add some custom values to the geometry node setup, and that way we'll be able to control those customizable values here on geometry node's modifier on the modifier properties. So if you want to do this, let's let's select the object and let's go back to geometry nodes. So if we zoom out here, we can plug values up to this group input here, and then that way we'll be able to control them here on the side panel. So on the side panel, let's go here to the modifier properties. I'm also going to go into the material preview just to see that in real time. And so now we can add the different custom values. So the first value that I want to control is the trunk thickness. So if we go here to this curved circle, you can see there's this radius here, and so that is going to change the curve thickness or the trunk thickness. So let's take the radius here, we'll pull out a wire and we'll stick that into the extra socket there. And then if I press the N key to open up the side panel, I can click here on the radius and I can rename this to trunk thickness. So now over here on the side panel, we have that trunk thickness value that we can control. Now I also want to control the amount of branches. So if we go over here to the branches on curve, we have this count here, and that is going to control the amount of branches. So let's take the count and we can stick that here into the group input. And then if I double click on this to rename it, I'll rename this to branches amount. And then you can see right here, there's that extra little button right here, but I don't want to use that button. So let's choose single value to get rid of that. Now I also want to be able to control the branch's rotation. So we have this rotation here, and so this max value, that is going to change the rotation. But I don't want to control the X and Y values, I just want to control the Z value, so we can break up the values. So we're going to go to the add menu and we're going to search for a combine XYZ, and let's stick this here into that rotation group there, stick it there, and then the vector can go into the max. So now we just need to take the Z value and we need to turn this back to 1000, which is what it was. And so now we have 3 different values to control the X, Y, and Z. But I just want to control the Z. So we'll drag the group input here and we can take the Z and we can put that into the extra socket. And then I can rename this to branches rotation. And then if you want to change the seed, there is this seed value here on the random value. So let's put the seed into that extra socket there. And then I can rename this to branches seed. So that'll randomize where the branches are placed. And also again, if you don't want to have those little buttons right there, let's click on single value and also click on this one here and then choose single value just to make that look a bit more neat. And then finally, I want to control the branch's size. So this scale value here, we have this multiply, and so that'll change the size of the branches. So let's take the value, let's drag it over here, and we're going to stick it here into the extra socket, and then I can rename this to branches size. And then one more thing, if we click on the branch's size, we can also choose single value. So I'll now press the N key to close the side panel, and let's go back here to the layout, and I can now show you what all the custom values can do. So we have the trunk thickness, so that's cool to change the size of the trunk. And then we also have the branches amount, so I could make it very sparse. If I just want to have a few branches, that looks really stylized, or I could turn the branches amount way up if I want it to be super thick. Then we also have the branches rotation just to randomize that, and then also a random seed if you don't like where the branches are, and then finally we have the branches size. So then here at the end of the video, I'll just give you a quick overview on how I created this 3D artwork, and so if you want to in your own time, you can do something similar to this as well. So I just added 3 different trees here, and then I also added a camera, and I just pointed the camera at the trees. And then I also added this empty object. And then to give it a nice depth of field, if you select the camera, you can go here to the camera object data properties, and then you can turn on the depth of field. And I chose the empty object for the focus, and I turned the f-stop way down, so that way we have a nice depth of field there. Now for the snow on the ground, I just added a plane and I scaled the plane way up. And then I subdivided the plane many times so it had lots of detail. And then over here on the modifiers, I gave it the subsurf modifier so that it is more smooth and has more detail. And then I also gave it a displace modifier. And I also added in this clouds texture on the displacement so that it's really bumpy. So you can see that is a super bumpy ground. And then for the material, I added in my procedural snow material. And so this is a tutorial that I created quite a while back. So if you'd like to check out that tutorial, I'll have a link in the description. And so you can see I've just added this procedural snow to the ground. Also for the snow here, if I go over here to the particles, I added a simple particle system. And then I just baked the particle system so that the snow falls down. And I also turned the emission strength up really high so that there's a lot of the snow. And then also to make the snow object, I added in this simple icos view here. And then if I go back here to the particle system, if you go down here to render, you can tell it to render as an object, and then here on the instance object, I just chose the icosphere. So that way we have some nice snow for the scene. And so this is what it looks like in the rendered view. So then after I rendered the scene in the compositing, I just did a few different compositing nodes. So I added a denoise just to denoise the image. I also added some glares just to add some glow, and then I added this RGB curves just to edit the colors a bit. And so here is the final artwork. And when you purchase the project files, as well as getting the Christmas tree geometry nodes modifier setup, you will also get the finished Blender file with this artwork here. So if you'd like to purchase the project files and help support the channel, the links will be in the description. But that's going to be it for this tutorial, so I hope you enjoyed this and thank you for watching. And if you'd like to learn more about geometry nodes, then definitely check out my geometry nodes tutorial playlist where I have many more geometry node tutorials. And if you'd like a complete introduction to geometry nodes to get a good basic understanding of the fundamentals of geometry nodes, then definitely check out my geometry nodes for beginners tutorial. I'll have a link to that beginner tutorial playlist in the description. But I hope you enjoyed this and thank you for watching.